Story 1. I used to work in music and toured with this band. The guitarist, Josh, of the band's best friend, Matt, had died a couple of years back. He always talked about the kid and he seemed like a great guy. Josh always had this reoccurring dream where Matt was standing on this abandoned street which supposedly was metaphorical for purgatory. Josh had all these conversations with Matt in these dreams, and because he had overdosed unexpectedly, he felt like his spirit was not able to move on. At the end of the dreams, Matt would take a bulb from the streetlight on the street they were standing in the middle of. Josh described these dreams in extreme detail, and I could pretty much picture what the street looked like. Fast forward to about 6 months into touring with these guys. They were huge Bright Eyes fans, and wanted to stop in Casadega, Florida. Bright Eyes singer wrote an album there, and it's a really creepy, spiritual medium place. It might be worth noting that 6 or 7 of the people I was with are all atheists. So we drive into Casadega around 2 or 3 AM and drive around. Suddenly this big black dog comes in the middle of the road and just stops and looks at us. The guys in this band were weird as fuck, and were saying things like, "Follow the dog, it's trying to show us something." And in my mind, I'm just thinking they're all fucking idiots. We followed this dog for a few blocks as it was walking pretty slowly. All of a sudden we turn a street, and the dog bolts. We try to speed up, but Josh says, "Stop the fucking van, this is it." We're all confused and he gets out of the van and looks around. This is it. This is the street in my dreams. We hung out for about 15 minutes, and from the way he described the street from having houses on the left to a park on the right, it was definitely the street. As we get in the van, a streetlight goes off, and we just drive off. He claims he never had any more dreams about it, as that was closure on everything. Story 2. When I was around 20 a few years ago, I kept having dreams about a woman with long black hair named Aurora. They were different dreams, but for some reason, her distinct face and name always ended up in them. It got to the point where I would wake up frustrated and confused, trying to Google her name or find out how I was connected to her. After a few months, she stopped showing up and I dismissed it, thinking my brain was just being a scumbag. Fast forward a few years later, on Halloween 2009, I was in the car with a friend stopped at a gas station. I'm about to pull out and merge onto the highway when I get a phone call from a random number. So I stop the car, but no one answers. There was a person behind me who grew impatient, honked at me, and then swerved in front of me instead of waiting for 2 seconds for me to move. Second, they get on the highway and some silver Civic loses control of their wheel and crashes into the car that swerved in front of me. I called the cops and waited at the gas station for them to come. Turns out the drivers of both cars died. It 100% would have been me if I hadn't gotten that phone call. I called it back again a few hours later out of gratitude and curiosity, rang 3 times, and went to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Aurora. Please leave your name and number." Never had goosebumps like that in my life. Called it again the next day, because I was that confused about the whole situation. Some woman answers, and we get to talking. I tell her my entire story, including the dreams I had. She tells me she doesn't know how I got her number and that she never called me as far as she remembers. Weird. I ask her if she has a Facebook to confirm if she is in fact the woman in my dreams. I check her Facebook. Holy fuck. It's her. If that's not a glitch in the Matrix, then I'm just batshit crazy. Story 3. I was at my girlfriend's, at the time's, parents' house, and suddenly started feeling really queasy. She and I headed to the kitchen so I could get a glass of water, and we stood with me leaning back against the counter and her hugging me. She was saying I had gone incredibly pale, like almost white, and my lips were going a purpley colour. She looked really scared. I then say to her, I can't feel my heart, and I check my pulse. The next thing I know, I'm in this place. I can't describe it except as an absence of absolutely everything. There was a floor, but I couldn't see it. I was just walking on nothing through nothing, and surrounded by nothing. But I was there, and it was there. There were other people with me. Discernible faces, clothes, and demeanours. I could see them and they could see me. Like, properly see me. Not just look at me, but actually see me. I could feel that they could. We were all there in complete silence. Just really calm and silent. And in this space of nothingness. And then this bright bluish light erupted from the distance and it called to us, silently beckoning us all towards it. So we started walking. I don't know why. We all just felt compelled as a single entity to head towards this light. It was beautiful. Really fucking beautiful. I've never seen a light so pure or so beautiful since. I have never felt a calm so serene, and strange happiness flowing through me. I could feel myself smiling, and feeling like all was right with everything in the world. Suddenly, I started being dragged backward, as if a fishing hook had just grasped my intestines from behind and it was pulling me. I felt intense pain and there was a rushing sound. The light got more and more distant, as did the people. and there was what I can only describe as a blood-curdling scream fading in from behind me. As this got louder, and as soon as the light faded, I woke up. I was on the floor of my girlfriend's kitchen. Her mother, a nurse, had just performed CPR on me, as I had actually been full-on dead. No pulse, no breathing. For about a minute, I felt like I was in space for an eternity. The scream was from my girlfriend, crying hysterically at the thought of me being dead. I promptly threw up everywhere and felt instantly better. Even doctors at the hospital don't know what the fuck happened to me. I was discharged after a few hours of tests with a clean bill of health and felt completely fine. What's even stranger is apparently when I said, "I can't feel my heart," I passed out and fell onto my girlfriend who couldn't support me, and I fell, hitting my head off the counter and smashing into some empty bottles on the floor. Whilst I was out, I'd apparently just stayed still, but smiled, until I stopped breathing. I was pale and my head and hands were freezing cold to the touch, but the rest of me was still warm. What's even stranger than that is her pet cats freaked the literal fuck out when I was dead, and all ran out of the house, howling into the night. One of them returned the next morning. The other two were found up a tree a few blocks away, meowing incessantly. Story 4. Driving home on a storm day, I see that a side road up to the local golf course is blocked off by flashing barricades. I also spy a Mercedes parked past the barricades with its hazards on. I stop and walk up to the car to see if they need help. I'm an EMT. I shine my light in the back seat to see a man slumped over, apparently asleep. Thinking I've got a few drunks, I move up to the driver's window and tap on the glass and shine my light in. The driver is sitting bolt upright, unmoving, staring straight ahead. My window tapping or light doesn't cause him to blink, flinch, or move. I look over and the passenger is slumped forward onto the dash. This begins to creep me out. I call down to the sheriff's station and request a code 2. No lights or sirens. Unit up back to my location to help me check them out. Doors are locked. While on the phone, I walk back to my truck to get my go bag. As I'm on the phone with dispatch, she asks me to get a license number for the car, just as a PG&E power company cherry picker truck comes rumbling down from up the closed road. I move to go around the truck to get the plate number, and the car is gone. I talked to the driver of the truck and he said there was an 80-foot tree down across the road, and that he didn't think it'd be open for a day or so. So the question is, the hell did the cargo do? Tree up one way, barricades down the other? It's kept me a bit unsettled when stopping at accidents or hazards since then. Story 5. I can't explain this and I hardly believe it myself. I've only ever told a couple of people, all of whom refuse to believe it could happen. On 2 occasions I have breathed underwater with no mechanical assistance. I was about 11 when it first happened. I was swimming one afternoon in the diving well at my gym. The pool is about 14 feet deep, with a fairly small surface area. I've always been a strong and confident swimmer, and love to dive to the bottom of the pool and flip over, open my eyes and look up at the surface. So I dive down, and sitting against the wall I have the overwhelming urge to breathe in. I refuse this thought, disbelieving and scoffing at my brain's sheer strangeness. But the thought comes again, and it's utterly convincing. I can't explain why I decided to breathe in. I just know that I wouldn't ever choose to do that. But in this instance I did. I took the most careful, mincing breathe in. I could feel great pressure, but I breathed normally. It was the air I breathed and not water. I took 4 full breaths while sitting at the bottom of the pool, and after each breath I became more horrified and agitated. My disbelief was outstanding. I kind of freaked and shot to the surface as quickly as I could. After I rationalized a bit, I calmed down. My logical mind kept thinking that somehow I'd had a bubble of air caught on my face, for how else could I have breathed like that? But over the years of trying to make sense of it, 30 years old now, I recognize that air finds its way to the surface expediently. It won't just catch around someone's face. I tried to do it again that day, diving and diving, trying to replicate the experience. Got quite a bit of water up my nose before I gave up. It did happen a second time, same pool 4 years later. I took 5 breaths. The same feeling of overwhelming confidence that it would be okay to breathe. Couldn't explain it the second time either. Very strange. Glitch? I don't know. No one has ever believed me, but I've only ever mentioned it to a select few. I still can't figure it out. Does anyone have any physics or logic thoughts on this? Has this happened to anyone else? Story 6. At a friend's place back in 2008, when we were all teenagers, we had a cool shed with friends that we'd hang out in every weekend. It had 4 sets of bunk beds, tables, a fireplace, a TV, a fridge, etc. The whole lot. One night we were all hanging out in there when I decided I needed a piss. I walked out in front of the door of the shed and started to walk to the right when I stopped. Now, let me explain the layout here. As you walk out of the shed, his house is to the left, and the right is where we all parked our cars. Further out you're left with empty fields and trees. It was dark by now. The lights from the house illuminating the space between the house and our cars, but trailing off just past them. As I took a step to the right, intending to go behind the cars to relieve myself, I saw my friend's older brother standing there. I watched him for a good 5 to 10 seconds as he stood there, facing into the darkness. He then proceeded to walk behind a couple of trees and the car before he disappeared. Confused, I walked back to the shed and asked my friend what his brother was doing by the cars. The conversation went as follows. Me: "Hey man, what's your brother doing by the cars?" Him: "What do you mean?" Me: "He just walked off behind the cars." His brother: "I'm right here." I looked over and there his brother was, sitting down on one of the chairs with a drink. He was wearing the same clothes as I saw him in, and the only way to get into the shed was through the door I was standing in the way of. To this day I have no idea how it all happened. I'm guessing I was just seeing things, but the fact I watched him walk around for a good 10 seconds has always puzzled me. I've never had anything else like that happen. Story 7. I live in Chicago. It's a very big and beautiful city, and ironically, also the city in the Matrix. Same street names, etc. One of my hobbies on extremely nice days is to go downtown and follow some odd-looking people around to see what they're doing. I think this is called being a Flanner in French, and I've experienced some weird things while following people that could be equated to Matrix glitches, even though I've never really had that thought before. The one that stands out in my mind as the most Matrix was a few summers ago. It was a Saturday and I was downtown with a parkour training group. The session was wrapping up at around 6 PM and everyone was getting ready to go home or somewhere else. I was sitting in a large tree we like to climb, and was looking down on an extremely odd man who had been watching us literally all day, since 10 AM. He was in his late 20s, I'd assume, thin but muscular, and wore sunglasses and a bright green and pink short-sleeve collared shirt and cargo shorts. He just sat there for the entire 8 hours and didn't fucking move, aside from maybe shifting in his seat whenever he saw something that impressed him. At this point, only 4 people were left lingering. One tracer, his 2 female friends, and myself. The man got up, went over to the group of 3 and said something. It looked intense, and the 2 girls stood bolt upright while one male threw his hands up in the air and had them drop to his sides quickly in a wild shrugging gesture. They were just out of earshot. I jumped down from my tree and stumbled, botched the landing, over to the trio. Apparently the man had left and I saw him walking briskly down the stairs towards Michigan Avenue, the main street of downtown Chicago. I was intent on following him, but I wanted to make sure he wasn't crazy first. When I got to the remaining 3 youths, the 2 girls just stood there in the same position they were before, completely quiet. I asked about the man, to which the male replied, sounding rather offended. "What man? It's just me and these 2 here." His face took on a strained look as if trying to remember the man like he should remember the man, but the look vanished as quickly as the man had. When it was clear that he wasn't going to say anything on the matter, I turned and jogged down the stairs towards Michigan Avenue. I looked left and right, then left again, and right again. I couldn't spot the guy. It had been less than a minute since he began walking and he was already out of sight, but he would have still been waiting for a break in traffic to do so. There was an open park to my right and rushing traffic to my left, and not a man in sight. Then I heard a scream from behind me and ran back to the park to see the 2 girls looming over the guy. I pushed them back and saw the male, who had slumped over, out cold and drooling a mixture of blood and spittle. He looked like he had just been beaten badly, just really had the snot knocked out of him. He was a pretty big guy, one of the most muscular guys I know. He could have taken 2 or 3 of anyone else in the park, no problem. But there he was, down for the count. I asked the girls if they had seen what happened. They said he was talking to himself, and then just fell over. I told one to call an ambulance and continued to question the other one. I asked about the man. They said they don't remember any man. I asked if they remembered me coming over there, but they didn't remember that either. Very odd. The ambulance arrived very shortly after and took that slumped over mess away on a stretcher as I sat there trying to explain, in detail, the events of the last 10 minutes to these girls who would just not believe me about the man in the neon green and pink. Story 8. It happened 2 days after I turned 8. I live in Finland and we had just moved into town. Our apartment was in these cheap rental high-rises on the 8th floor. My grandma had given me a few comic books as a present and I've been reading them ever since the party. Quite a stack. Something like 10 to 15 individual comics. There was this one book, a SpiderMan comic. It wasn't about the usual Spidey, but something about Peter Parker's clone acting as a Crimson Spider-Man. At least that's how it was translated to Finnish. I had just returned from school so my parents were still at work and I started reading this comic. On some pages the protagonist is crouching on the roof, jumps down and lands into the Spidey crouch, hands between his legs. Without thinking anything, I just laid down the comic, walked over to our balcony, and climbed onto the fence using a chair as a ladder. As I was sitting there, I saw some man down and across the street. He saw me sitting there and started running over towards our house. At this same moment, I had this really calm feeling taking over me. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and jumped down. When I jumped, I could hear the man scream, "Ei jumalauta," followed by an abbreviation to God help me. Then I just heard the wind in my ears. The next thing I know, I'm on the ground, crouching like Spider-Man. The man runs around some high bushes just when I stand up, stops dead in his tracks and all colour escapes his face. He just stood there with absolute terror in his eyes, completely silent and looking at me for a few seconds before backing away slowly, without turning his face off me before he's back to the corner where he turned away. I returned to the lower door only to find out I had left my key inside, so I just sat down and waited for my father to return from work. Something like 1 hour. He was naturally surprised to find me there without my backpack. I told him what had happened. "Dad, I'm SpiderMan," when we were in the elevator. Dad thought it was just my imagination. When we returned inside and he saw my comic book laid open on the ground with the page featuring the jump at the balcony door left open, he took away the particular comic book and never allowed me on the balcony before I turned 12, and we moved to a better house. He also becomes disoriented every time I mention this to him, and changes the subject quickly. Although he does admit he found me downstairs and the balcony door was open. I still remember this occasionally, clear as day. Story 9. Ever since I was a kid, I have had what I call doubling occasionally happen around me. I put something in a pocket, then later find it in another pocket, as well as the original put in the pocket I had put it in. And yes, it has happened to money before. Score. The most standout example was when I was a teen at camp. All of the leaders had engraved plastic name tags and we were only issued one. I used to keep moving mine between my hat and my shirt. At the end of camp, I just crammed all my stuff in a duffel and headed home. Later, when I unpack, the first thing I do is pull out my hat with the tag on it. Okay, so that's where I had it last. And of course, a minute later I pull out a shirt with the same name tag pinned to it. I also experienced a similar phenomenon when I was a kid. For a few years it happened daily, but haven't seen it in a long time. Someone would place something in their pocket or backpack, etc., but when they went to grab it later it would be missing. I would then reach into my pocket, backpack, whatever, and pull the item out. I initially got accused of being a thief, but when it happened repeatedly when I hadn't even been within 20 feet of the victim, my friends and classmates stopped doing so, and just kind of accepted that that would happen around me. Story 10. I have 2 stories that are just weird as fuck. Both of them are things I would just not believe if someone else had told them to me, but I can swear with every fibre of my being that they happened as I write them here. The first happened a couple of years ago, but my mother and I had gone to A&W for lunch, and we were both sitting there eating our meals. We happened to be seated pretty close to the washroom door, so I noticed everyone going in and out. The first person to come out is this old man who's kind of hobbling along. He walked past and I looked at him and went on with my meal. Not 30 seconds later, another man comes out of the bathroom, and at this point I get a little freaked out because I realise it's the exact same person. Same limp, clothing, face, everything. A couple of minutes later, the same thing happens, except it's an old woman this time. She comes out, then 30 seconds later comes right out of the bathroom again. My mum took a look at me and said, "You look like you've seen a ghost." I just kind of stammered a bit and then wrote it off as me being crazy. The next story is weirder in my opinion, and is the single strangest occurrence of my life. This happened when I was about 9 years old, but I can still remember it vividly. We were visiting family in Nevada with my dad, and they lived out in a very dry area in a fairly good-sized trailer. A couple of days in, I was playing outside with my cousin, pretty much just messing around in the dirt. At some point I looked up. Right next to a house is a field, I guess? Surrounded by a wire fence, probably originally for livestock. But anyway, this guy is standing there. This is a good 300 or more feet away, so I cannot see him clearly at all. Cue the weird. As soon as I look at this guy, I have what I can only describe as an out-of-body experience. My body pretty much went into lockdown, and I was no longer seeing through my eyes. And I wasn't just floating there or anything, I was in that man's body. Through his eyes, I could see 2 little shapes playing across the field, but I could just feel that he saw the shapes as animals. And then I realized he was holding a fucking shotgun. After that I regained my body and blurted out, "We have to go indoors," not explaining it to my cousin, who thought I was nuts. I didn't tell anyone because I just didn't know how to express it to other people back then. I've only since told my brothers, but I don't think they believed me. Still freaks me out when I think about it today because it's the only time I've ever lost control of my body. It was almost like a dream, but the whole thing felt like it was happening in slow motion.